Stop everything you're doing right now. I mean it. Put down that phone. Stop pretending to work and listen to me. You think you know what chaos looks like? That time your roommate ate your leftovers and tried to replace them with a note. That group project where one guy did absolutely nothing but still got the same grade. That's child's play. That's chaos with training wheels. Welcome to part 2 of our Rasputin saga, where the Siberian mystic stops being just a weird spiritual houseguest and becomes the Romanov family's personal chaos demon, actively gaslighting an entire empire into the ground, while World War I literally explodes around them. I'm your host, the Midnight Meme Historian, and we're about to dive into the period where Rasputin went from spiritual advisor to glitch in the matrix of the Russian Empire, a digital demon who was about to make the whole system blue screen into revolution. Now before we get into the absolute insanity, let me set the stage with some context that most history channels skip, because they're too busy showing stock footage of marching soldiers. Russia in 1914 was just an empire. It was a 300-year-old startup that had somehow gone public without a viable business model. The user interface was beautiful. Golden palaces, fancy balls, Fabergé eggs. But the back-end code was spaghetti written by a drunk coder at 3 a.m. The entire system was held together by duct tape, peasant labor, and the divine right of kings, which is basically the historical equivalent of "trust me, bro." So, where we left off, Rasputin had successfully weaponized the desperation of a mother to become the Tsarina's favorite human teddy bear, her emotional support warlock. He was the guy who could supposedly fix the one thing that was unfixable, her son's hemophilia. But let's be crystal clear about something. He wasn't content with just being the royal psychic on retainer. Oh no. That would be like getting admin access to the most powerful computer in the world, and only using it to play solitaire. Rasputin looked at that command prompt, cracked his knuckles, and decided to start deleting System 32 files just to see what would happen. He was about to install malware that would make the entire operating system crash in a spectacular fireball of incompetence. And the crazy part, he probably didn't even realize he was doing it. Let's set the stage for this new level of insanity, because context is everything. The year is 1914. A bullet in Sarajevo has just lit the fuse on World War I, the conflict that would end empires, redefine the world map, and kill millions. And Tsar Nicholas II, in a move of such breathtaking, monumental, face-melting stupidity that it still makes historians want to throw their textbooks against the wall, decides to personally take command of the Russian army. Let me be absolutely clear about this man's qualifications. Nicholas was a man whose military experience consisted of wearing fancy uniforms, watching parades, and looking concerned in photographs. He was now going to lead millions of men against the German war machine, which was basically the equivalent of your dad, who still can't figure out how to use the TV remote, trying to pilot the space shuttle during re-entry. It was a decision so catastrophically bad that it defies all modern understanding of risk management. This meant Nicholas was away at the front for months at a time, leaving Alexandra, and by extension Rasputin, effectively in charge of the world's largest country. Let that sink in for a moment. Let it really marinate in your brain. The fate of a nation of 150 million people, embroiled in the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. was now being influenced by a man who believed the quickest path to God was through a brothel and a bottle of Madeira wine. A man who hadn't had a proper bath in years. A man whose idea of military strategy was, the trees have bad energy. This isn't just a bad decision. It's a catastrophic failure of judgment on a cosmic scale. It's like leaving your meth-addled cousin in charge of Fort Knox because he's good with dogs. It's the kind of decision that makes you wonder if someone had slipped something into the royal tea. And how does Rasputin, our unwashed oracle, our peasant prophet, exert his influence from the home front? Through a relentless, never-ending stream of telegrams and letters to Alexandra that sound like they were written by a drunk AI trained on religious texts and celebrity gossip. Is giving actual military advice, political recommendations, and cabinet appointments based on his divine visions. Let me read you an actual, no-joke, historically documented telegram he sent to the Tsar, verbatim. I am looking at a map of the front. I see a great forest. Do not attack through the forest. The trees have bad energy. I'm not making this up. This wasn't some obscure diary entry. This was actual military strategy being fed to the commander-in-chief of the entire Russian army. It's like if a modern general took advice from a magic 8-ball. Outlook not good. Okay. Well, retreat and let the enemy advance 50 miles. Thanks, Spirit World. This wasn't governance. It was a mystical version of a corporate reshuffle conducted by a carnival fortune teller. Ministers with decades of experience, men who actually understood economics and logistics, were fired because Rasputin didn't like their aura. He'd tell Alexandra, that one has a dark cloud around him. Or, I had a dream that this minister was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And she would immediately write to Nicholas, our friend says this man must go. Meanwhile, incompetent sycophants were promoted because they kissed his ring, sometimes literally, and donated generously to his once spiritual cause, which mostly funded his massive alcohol budget and his charitable work with his female followers. The term cabinet reshuffle doesn't do this justice. This was a cabinet massacre. Between 1914 and 1916, Russia had 4 prime ministers, 5 ministers of the interior, 3 ministers of war, and 3 ministers of foreign affairs. The government was a revolving door of Rasputin's favorites, a clown car of incompetence where the clowns kept changing. But the car was still speeding directly toward a cliff, and the passengers were all screaming, the aristocracy. The old money families who had served the Romanovs for centuries were losing their collective diamond-encrusted minds. They saw this filthy peasant from Siberia, this human stain on the silk upholstery of power, effectively running the country, and they were plotting like it was an episode of the Real Housewives of St. Petersburg. They tried to warn Nicholas. They compiled dossiers thicker than a Tolstoy novel. They had the Okhrana, the secret police, follow Rasputin and document his every move. The police reports were absolutely legendary. They detailed his drunken binges at Yar restaurant, where he'd reportedly get so catastrophically wasted he'd expose himself, grab the maitre d', and scream that he could bed any woman in the empire, including the Tsarina. They documented his prayer sessions with society ladies that always seemed to end in private rooms, with a lot of heavy breathing and very little praying. They had witnesses. They had times. They had dates. It was all there. A comprehensive record of debauchery that would make a rock star blush. But here's where the gaslighting became absolutely masterful, a work of psychological art. When the aristocracy complained, when they presented their evidence, Rasputin would tell Alexandra, "See? They're attacking me because they're attacking you. They don't believe in your judgment. They're undermining the monarchy itself. They are demons sent to test our faith. They want to separate you from God's chosen servant." He positioned himself as the only true friend of the royal family, the only one who understood their sacred burden. He turned their paranoia into his body armor. It's a playbook you see every day in toxic relationships and cults. Create an us versus them mentality. Isolate the mark from their support network, and then present yourself as the only solution. He was the original cult leader in a world without podcasts, a psychological vampire feeding on the insecurities of the most powerful woman in Russia. He was the human equivalent of a pop-up ad that says, "Your computer has a virus. Click here to fix it," and then installs more viruses. And Alexandra, already isolated by her German heritage and her son's terrible illness, ate it up like it was her last meal. She wrote letters to Nicholas at the front that are almost physically painful to read. They're filled with phrases like, "Our friend's prayers are a shield around you," and "Always trust in Grigori. He sees what others cannot. He is sent by God to guide us." She was living in a divine fantasy, a holy soap opera, while the real world was collapsing into starvation, slaughter, and revolution. The disconnect was astronomical. It was like watching someone rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, while passionately arguing about the feng shui of the ballroom as the water pours in. She was so deep in the cult of personality that she couldn't see the iceberg, even when it was scraping the side of the ship. The public, of course, was not blind. While peasants were dying in the frozen, muddy trenches of the Eastern Front, and bread lines stretched for blocks in Petrograd, the renamed, less German-sounding St. Petersburg, the rumors about Rasputin and the German woman, Tsarina, spread like wildfire. The propaganda was vicious, effective, and often hilariously obscene. Pamphlets and cartoons depicted Rasputin and Alexandra in graphically compromising positions, ruling Russia from the bedroom. He was portrayed as the puppet master, with the Tsar and Tsarina as his drunken, stupid marionettes. The meme had escaped the palace walls and was now infecting the entire body politic. Grigori Rasputin was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of everything that was rotten, corrupt, and incompetent about the Romanov regime. He was the living, breathing proof that God had abandoned the Tsar, and the people knew it. Then came the event that truly cemented his unkillable legend, the first assassination attempt. In June of 1914, a woman named Kionia Guseva, a former follower who had become disillusioned with his interpretation of scripture, approached him in his hometown of Pokrovskoye. She screamed, "You have defiled the faith, you devil!" and stabbed him in the gut with a dagger. The wound was so severe that his intestines were literally hanging out. Local doctors were summoned, took one look at the mess, and basically said, "Well, pack it in, boys. Hezagona. Say your prayers." They didn't even bother to properly clean the wound, just sort of stuffed his guts back in, and sewed him up with what was probably fishing line, fully expecting him to die of a massive infection within days. But he didn't. Of course he didn't. Because in any good horror movie, the monster has to survive the first act, against all medical logic, against all odds, against basic human biology. Rasputin survived. He languished for weeks in agony, but he lived. This near-death experience only deepened the myth among his followers. His unkillable is protected by God or something much, much darker. It was the perfect public relations campaign that he never had to pay for. An assassination attempt had failed, making him seem both martyred and supernatural. He was like a cockroach that had survived a nuclear blast. Now he was radioactive, mutated, and even harder to kill. The Aristocracy's first attempt to delete the virus had only made it stronger, more resilient, and more embedded in the system. The real horror of Part 2 isn't the spooky mysticism or the Halloween-style monster. It's the brutal, logical, psychological horror of watching one man systematically dismantle the credibility of a 300-year-old dynasty through sheer force of personality and psychological manipulation. He made the Russian government look like a poorly moderated subreddit, with him as the rogue admin banning anyone who disagreed. He wasn't a wizard. He was a master psychologist who understood that the most powerful people are often the most insecure. He was the original hype man, the ultimate yes man, and the court jester all rolled into one, and he had the ear of the person who trusted him most. He was the human embodiment of a viral misinformation campaign, and the algorithm of the Russian court just kept promoting him to the top of the feed. So, Chaos Council, I have to ask you a serious question after all that. What's the most infuriatingly brilliant part of his gaslighting strategy? Was it how he isolated the Tsarina, making her so dependent on him that she saw any criticism as a personal attack? Or was it how he masterfully reframed every attack from the aristocracy as an attack on the monarchy itself, turning their valid concerns into proof of his divine role? And who does this remind you of in today's world? Is it the political advisor who everyone can see is a walking disaster except the one person who matters? Is it the influencer who has their followers wrapped around their finger, despite all evidence and common sense? Drop your analysis in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Let's see who really understands the art of historical chaos, because trust me, this pattern is older than time itself. But hold on to your hats, because the final act of this insanity is coming in Part 3. The aristocrats have had enough of writing angry letters. They're done with compiling dossiers. They're going to try to kill him again. And let me tell you, their assassination attempt makes the Three Stooges look like a well-oiled special ops team. It involves enough poison to kill a horse, multiple gunshots, a frozen river, and a level of incompetence that is almost artistic in its pure, unadulterated failure. You will not want to miss the grand finale of the Unkillable meme. Subscribe, hit that bell, and get ready. The algorithm demands a bloody conclusion, and we're going to give it one. And if you want to wear your appreciation for history's greatest gaslighter, check out the new merch. We've got a design featuring a glitching crown with the text, "System Error, Rasputin, Dealer not found." Link is in the description. This is Midnight Meme Historian, signing off until the next chapter of Chaos. Now let's talk about what this gaslighting actually looked like in practice, because we've only scratched the surface of this psychological masterpiece. Rasputin didn't just give bad advice. He created an entire parallel reality that only he and the royal family could see. He was running a beta test for what would later become QAnon, but with more actual access to power and better costumes. Now let's get into the real nitty-gritty of how this gaslighting operation worked on a day-to-day basis. Because it's even more insane when you look at the mechanics. We're talking about a peasant who literally couldn't spell properly, sending semi-literate notes that were treated like divine scripture. Alexandra kept a special box where she stored all of Rasputin's telegrams and letters, treating them like holy relics. She'd take them out, read them to herself, and then paraphrase them in her own letters to Nicholas at the front. It was like a game of historical telephone, where the message started as drunken rambling and ended up as state policy. Let me give you another specific example that's so stupid it's beautiful. There was this one time when Rasputin decided he didn't like the Minister of the Interior, a man named Alexei Kvostov. Why didn't he like him? Who knows? Maybe Kvostov looked at him funny. Maybe he didn't laugh at one of his jokes. So Rasputin tells Alexandra, "This man has a black heart. He will betray you." That's it. No evidence, no reasoning, just vibes. And Alexandra, without questioning it, writes to Nicholas, "Our friend says Kvostov is dangerous and must be removed immediately." And Nicholas, the ultimate simp for his wife's delusions, fires the guy. Just like that. A high-ranking government official gone because a drunk mystic had a bad feeling. It's like if your CEO fired the head of marketing because his horoscope said to avoid Geminis that day. And the appointments were even worse. Rasputin would basically play fantasy cabinet with real human lives. He'd meet some random bureaucrat at a party, decide he had good energy, and next thing you know, that guy is in charge of supplying the entire Russian army. There's one legendary case where Rasputin got a man named Alexander Protopopov appointed as Minister of the Interior. Protopopov's main qualification. He once gave Rasputin a really nice carriage. I'm not making this up. The man responsible for internal security for the entire Russian Empire got his job because he was good at picking out horse-drawn vehicles. It's like making someone Secretary of Defense because they brought really good cookies to the Pentagon bake sale. Meanwhile, the actual war effort was collapsing into a dumpster fire of historic proportions. Russian soldiers were being sent to the front without rifles, told to pick up weapons from their dead comrades. They were starving, freezing, and dying by the hundreds of thousands. And back in Petrograd, Rasputin was holding court, surrounded by his female admirers, drinking like a fish and holding forth on matters of state. The contrast couldn't have been more stark if it was scripted by a Hollywood writer trying to make a point about inequality. It was like that scene in every disaster movie where the rich people are partying on the yacht while the city burns in the background, except this was real, and the rich people were literally taking advice from the drunkest guy on the boat. The aristocracy's frustration was reaching a boiling point. They weren't just annoyed, they were terrified. They could see the revolution coming. They could smell it in the air. And they knew that Rasputin was the lightning rod that was drawing the storm directly toward them. They tried everything. They went to Nicholas' mother, the Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna, who hated Rasputin with the fire of 1,000 suns. She begged her son to see reason. Nicholas' response? He basically said, "I know you mean well, Mama, but my wife says he's a saint, so..." It was like watching someone defend their toxic relationship on a reality show, except the stakes were the fate of millions of people. They even tried to get the church to excommunicate him. The Holy Synod, the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church, investigated Rasputin for heresy. They had evidence of his involvement with the Klisti sect. They had testimony about his sexual escapades. They had everything they needed to declare him a heretic and cast him out. But guess what happened? Alexandra intervened. She pressured the church to drop the investigation. So, the established religious institution of 1,000 years was powerless against the influence of one dirty peasant, because the Tsarina had his back. It's like if the Pope tried to excommunicate someone, and the president's wife said, "No, he's cool." And the Pope just shrugged and said, "Okay, never mind." This is where the Halloween connection really comes into play. Because for the aristocracy, Rasputin wasn't just a man. He was a literal phantom, a demon they couldn't exorcise. No matter what they did, no matter how much evidence they gathered, no matter how many people they convinced, he kept coming back. He was like the monster in a horror movie. Let you keep shooting and stabbing, but it just gets back up, looking even more pissed off. He was their personal poltergeist, haunting the halls of power, breaking their fine china, and seducing their wives. And they were utterly powerless to stop him. He was the living embodiment of their worst nightmare. The peasantry, which they had oppressed and ignored for centuries, suddenly having more power than they did. And let's talk about the sheer psychological genius of his gaslighting technique. He didn't just tell Alexandra what she wanted to hear. He told her what she needed to hear to feel special and chosen. He framed their suffering, their son's illness, the war, the criticism, as a divine test. He told them they were like biblical figures, suffering for a higher purpose. He turned their incompetence into martyrdom. It was the ultimate reframing. They weren't bad rulers. They were misunderstood saints. It's the same trick every narcissistic guru used today. The world doesn't understand you because you're too enlightened. They're attacking you because they're afraid of your power. It's a bulletproof strategy, because any evidence against it just proves the point. So, Chaos Council, I want you to imagine yourself in the shoes of a Russian aristocrat in 1916. You're watching your country fall apart. You're watching your friends die in a pointless war. You're watching the government become a parody of itself. And you know that the reason for all of this is a semi-literate, drunken, hypersexual peasant who has the ear of the Tsarina, because he convinced her he has magic powers. What do? Do you try to reason with the Tsar, who is clearly in a state of denial? Do you try to expose Rasputin, even though every previous attempt has backfired? Or do you start thinking, more permanently, type A for diplomacy, B for exposure, or C for assassination in the comments? Let's see what the Midnight Meme historian community would have done. Because here's the thing that really blows my mind about this whole situation. Rasputin probably wasn't even some evil mastermind. I don't think he woke up one morning and said, "Today, I'm going to destroy the Russian Empire." I think he was just a grifter who got incredibly historically lucky. He found the perfect mark in Alexandra, a woman so desperate for hope that she would cling to anything. He found the perfect enabler in Nicholas, a man so weak-willed that he couldn't stand up to his own wife. He found the perfect environment in a decaying empire that was already teetering on the brink. He was the right virus at the right time for a terminally ill patient. He wasn't the cause of the disease. He was just the final catastrophic symptom, and the public knew it. The rumors weren't just confined to whispered conversations in drawing rooms. They were in the newspapers, in the pamphlets that were passed hand to hand, in the jokes people told in bread lines. Rasputin became a folk villain, a symbol of everything wrong with the old regime. He was more famous than the Tsar. People who couldn't name a single government minister knew all about the Mad Monk. He was the original celebrity train wreck, and the entire country was watching, horrified, but fascinated. He was the living, breathing proof that the system was broken beyond repair, that the people in charge were either fools or frauds. He was the meme that killed an empire. So as we approach the end of part 2, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer scale of this failure. We're not just talking about a political scandal. We're talking about a complete and total collapse of judgment at the highest levels of power. We're talking about a royal family so trapped in their own delusions that they couldn't see the revolution coming until it was knocking down their door. We're talking about an aristocracy so incompetent that they couldn't eliminate one unarmed peasant. And we're talking about the peasant himself, who stumbled into the center of history, and, through a combination of charisma, luck, and sheer audacity, helped push the whole thing over the edge. But the story isn't over yet. The aristocracy has one last card to play. They're done talking. They're done gathering evidence. They're going to try to solve the Rasputin problem the old-fashioned way. And their solution is so comically, catastrophically incompetent that it deserves its own video. We're talking poisoned bullets and a frozen river. We're talking about a murder plot so botched it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. So, if you're not already subscribed, now is the time. Hit that button, ring the bell, and get ready for the final chapter of the Unkillable meme. The algorithm is waiting, and so am I. This is Midnight Meme Historian, and I'll see you in the next one. Take his famous healing sessions, for example. When he'd treat Alexei, it wasn't just about praying by his bedside. He'd create these elaborate rituals that were part theater, part psychology, and part pure nonsense. He'd wave his hands over the boy, muttering what sounded like church Slavonic, but was probably just Siberian gibberish, and then declare the bleeding would stop. And sometimes, and this is the crucial part, it did. Not because of magic, but because stress exacerbates hemophilia, and Rasputin's presence actually calmed both the boy and his hysterical mother. He was a walking, talking, unwashed Xanax pill. He understood the placebo effect better than the actual doctors, who were still prescribing leeches and mercury. It's like if a modern wellness influencer actually managed to cure someone's anxiety by selling them overpriced crystals. Not because the crystals work, but because the belief is so powerful. But here's where it gets even more insidious. Rasputin started applying this same vibes-based medicine to affairs of state. The Russian economy is collapsing. The problem is the Jews. They have bad energy. Military strategy. I had a dream we should attack at dawn on Tuesday, because the moon is in Venus. Cabinet appointments. This man has a pure soul. I can feel it in his handshake. He was running a continental superpower like it was his personal Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Rolling natural 20s while actual lives hung in the balance. The aristocracy's response to this was a masterclass in incompetence. They were like the managers at a company who know one employee is embezzling but can't fire him because he's the CEO's best friend. They tried everything short of actually solving the problem. They held secret meetings in gilded drawing rooms, sipping champagne and whispering about the mad monk, while he was literally down the street getting drunk and probably hitting on their wives. They were the original keyboard warriors, all talk, no action, until it was too late. One of my favorite examples of their pathetic attempts to fight back involves Prime Minister Vladimir Kokovtsov, who was actually competent, a fatal flaw in the Rasputin era. Kokovtsov tried to present Nicholas with a dossier of Rasputin's worst behavior. Nicholas' response. He told Kokovtsov, "I know he's a simple Russian peasant, and sometimes peasants do sinful things, but his soul is close to God. It's the historical equivalent of boys will be boys, applied to national security." Kokovtsov was fired shortly after, replaced by someone Rasputin found more agreeable. Probably someone who didn't bother him with annoying things like facts or evidence. Meanwhile, the public's hatred for Rasputin was becoming a national pastime. He was the original cancel culture target, except instead of getting ratioed on Twitter, people were writing entire operas about how much they hated him. Cartoons depicted him as a giant spider sucking the blood of Russia, or as a demon crawling out of the Siberian mud. Pamphlets circulated claiming he was the Antichrist, that he had literal claws instead of fingernails, that he could hypnotize women with a single glance. The propaganda was so over the top it would make a North Korean news agency blush. And through it all, Rasputin just kept getting more powerful. He was like a troll who discovered he could get more engagement the more outrageous he became. Every scandal, every assassination attempt, every expose just made him stronger in the eyes of his two most important followers. He had achieved what every influencer dreams of: complete immunity to criticism. He could literally be caught with his pants down in a brothel, which happened multiple times, and Alexandra would write it off as holy foolishness. Let me give you one more specific example that perfectly captures the absurdity of the situation. In 1915, Rasputin decided he didn't like the way the war was being managed from military headquarters, so he sent a telegram. And I swear I'm not making this up, that read, "The little one asks that you order an immediate advance along the entire front." The little one was Alexei. Rasputin was using a hemophiliac child as his source for military strategy. It's like if a 5-year-old drew a battle plan in crayon, and the Pentagon immediately implemented it. The sheer, unadulterated madness of this cannot be overstated. By 1916, the situation had reached critical mass. The government was in shambles, the war was going disastrously, and Rasputin was effectively the shadow ruler of Russia. He wasn't just influencing policy, he was making it. Ministers would literally line up outside his apartment to get his approval for their proposals. It was like a medieval court, except instead of a king you had a drunk peasant who may or may not have just come from an orgy. The system had completely broken down, and everyone could see it except the two people at the very top. So, Chaos Council, I want you to picture this final scene from part 2. It's late 1916. Nicholas is at the front, losing a war. Alexandra is in the palace, writing letters based on Rasputin's latest drunken vision. The aristocracy is plotting in drawing rooms. The peasants are starving in the streets, and Rasputin is holding court in his apartment, surrounded by admirers, drinking Madeira wine, and deciding the fate of millions between bites of poisoned cake that somehow won't kill him. It's the perfect storm of incompetence, delusion, and historical inevitability. The real tragedy and the real horror is that none of this had to happen. Rasputin wasn't some supernatural force. He was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was a system so rotten, so out of touch, so fundamentally broken that it would rather listen to a mystic drunk than address its own failures. He was the mirror held up to the Romanovs, and they didn't like what they saw, so they convinced themselves it was a window to heaven. And that's why this story matters today, because we're still falling for the same tricks. We still have leaders who prefer comforting lies to uncomfortable truths. We still have systems that protect the powerful at the expense of the competent. We still have people who'd rather believe in magic than do the hard work of fixing what's broken. Rasputin didn't destroy the Russian Empire. He just showed everyone how fragile it already was. So we'll leave you with this final question before we move to the explosive conclusion in Part 3. Looking at our modern world, our politics, our media, our culture, where do you see the ghost of Rasputin today? Is it the influencer selling miracle cures? The politician peddling simple solutions to complex problems? The advisor who tells the boss only what they want to hear? Type your answers in the comments. Let's build a modern Rasputin Hall of Fame. The end of this story is coming, and it's even more insane than what we've covered so far. Poison, bullets, frozen rivers, the aristocracy's final attempt to solve the Rasputin problem is a comedy of errors that would be hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. Make sure you're subscribed and that bell is clicked, because you won't want to miss the grand finale of history's most unkillable meme. This is Midnight Meme Historian, and I'll see you in the next one.